What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, your host with the most, back here with another episode of Clutch Crew Sports. And on this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the divisional round of the NFL playoffs coming up and recapping Super Wildcard Weekend, which has now come and passed. I know I'm a little late with this video, been getting distracted a little bit by some other things, but, gonna get this video out here now. It's fine. The games don't start until Saturday, so gonna go ahead and go around the shield, and first gonna take a look at the teams that got eliminated during Wildcard Weekend and talk a little bit about what they need to do going forward, potentially for next year, and then move on to the 4 divisional round games and give my predictions for all of them. So we'll start here with the 2 games on Saturday, the 2 teams that got eliminated. First, the Seattle Seahawks got eliminated by the 49ers. The Seahawks were definitely in that game for a while. It was really close at halftime. The Seahawks actually had the lead at halftime, and then the Niners pretty much just pulled away in the second half, and it wasn't really close at all. It was one of those things that, during the first half, I was thinking, oh, man, this is actually going to be a game, and then it got to the second half, and I was like, okay, well, this is a lot more of what I thought I would see. But for the Seahawks, really, there's a lot of questions for them going into the offseason. This is a team that started out the year really well. They were leading the NFC West at one point, and then they really kind of took a little bit of a turn for the worse as the season went on. They did obviously finish with a winning record and finished, they were able to get into the playoffs with that last week win in overtime over the Los Angeles Rams, but they definitely looked like they'd cooled off and that teams have started to figure them out. Of course, the big question for them in the offseason is, of course, the quarterback situation. Geno Smith had a really fantastic comeback season. He broke Russell Wilson's Seattle passing record. Most likely probably going to win comeback player of the year. I know McCaffrey and Saquon are definitely still in the race as well, but I think it should probably go to Geno Smith. But really for them, it's just, they really just got to work on it. If they want to bring Geno Smith back, which I'm assuming they're going to, I don't see why they wouldn't. But then the question also becomes, they do have a really high pick in the draft. So there is a question also if they might want to go ahead and draft a quarterback, since they do have that pick from Denver. So they have a really high pick in the first round of the draft. So they could potentially either take a quarterback with that pick, or they could trade that pick away to someone who potentially wants a quarterback and get some more draft capital or some players. But in my mind, Geno Smith should be coming back. I don't think they'll draft a quarterback, but you never know. I mean, with how deep this quarterback class is supposed to be, they could draft a quarterback to help, give Geno some competition and push him to be better, and really just to shore up the offensive and defensive line. The secondary was really good this year. They, of course, they have a great young star at running back in Kenneth Walker. They've still got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So really just fortify the O-line, fortify the D-line, and if they can still get consistent good play out of Geno Smith, and this team could definitely make the playoffs again next year. But then we're going to move on to the other team that lost, the Los Angeles Chargers. Definitely a bit of a collapse. Unfortunately, they were the team that kept me from going 6 for 6 in my picks last week. I picked them to beat the Jaguars, and unfortunately, I got every other pick right except that one. Thankfully, it didn't affect my overall picks long-term for the most part, but, they kind of let me down there. But definitely an interesting situation for the Chargers. They finally made the playoffs this year with Justin Herbert, and, they were favored to win that game. They were winning that game, and it really just all, they were dominating in the first half. They had intercepted Trevor Lawrence 4 times. They were up 27-7. Jacksonville got that touchdown right at the end of the first half, and then it just all completely fell apart. The defense couldn't stop anything. The offense started stalling. And, in response to the offense stalling, they did fire offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi here a couple days ago. And, they're really just looking for a new identity. I think the thing for the Chargers really is just, it's really just going to be an offensive line thing in the offseason for me. They have great weapons. Herbert's a great quarterback. Austin Eckler is one of the best dual-threat running backs in the league. If everyone can stay healthy, that's the other thing. Like, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are a really good receiving duo if they can stay healthy. And Gerald Everett actually had a good bit of a resurgence this year at having a good year as a tight end. But really, it's just coming down to that offensive line. The Jaguars' pass rush really started getting there in the second half and making Herbert uncomfortable. They really also need the O-line because they have no semblance of a run game. They pretty much just abandoned the run in the second half for some reason, which is kind of weird given that, you'd think a team that was leading by 20 points would want to establish the run and run some clock. But they really just tend to abandon the run in these games. Like, which is unfortunate because Eckler is a good running back. It's just their offensive line's not good enough to open up holes for him and get him going. So it's something that they really are going to have to work on in the offseason, getting more offensive linemen. I anticipate they're going to be drafting an offensive lineman most likely. They were without Rashawn Slater for most of the year, so that'll help to have him back next year. And really I know the other thing for this game that was unfortunate was the refs in the game were terrible. I mean, on both sides. Like, I'm not going to say the Chargers got screwed by the refs because they definitely made some bad calls the Jaguars' way as well. So I'm just glad that those officials are not going to be reffing at all because, they missed a pretty clear, illegal contact or something like that on the Chargers when the Jags were going for a touchdown at one point. And then, of course, on the game-winning touchdown by the Jaguars that led to them eventually, getting in position to take the lead. Not the game-winning touchdown, but the one that got them to within 2 points of L.A., there was on that play where, of course, Bosa got flagged for that 15-yarder because he threw his helmet. But, on that play before that, the refs not only missed a false start on the Jags, but they also missed a holding on the Jags on that play. So that's why Bosa was frustrated. And just a lot of really poor officiating going on in that game all around. I'm not going to say that the Chargers lost because of the refs. They definitely lost because they collapsed. But, just some bad calls overall in that game. But yeah, Chargers, definitely offensive line is the priority in the offseason. So then moving on to Sunday, we have the Miami Dolphins who lost 34-31 to the Bills. Definitely a lot closer game. Really, I do think the Dolphins have a lot to thank their defense for in that game because if you look at the actual drive charts for the Dolphins, and how their offense did, their offense really didn't perform that spectacularly. They only actually had one actual long drive that resulted in a touchdown, 175-yard touchdown drive. Pretty well all the other ones were either they had a defensive touchdown and they were set up by turnovers by the Bills. Allen threw 2 interceptions, and then the touchdown that the Dolphins got on defense was a scoop and score. So, kudos to the Dolphins defense for really coming through big there when, with Tua being out and the offense struggling. Skylar Thompson was not really, too much of a factor in that game. So definitely some things that the Bills are going to have to clean up for sure on the offensive side of the ball because the Dolphins defense did a really good job staying in it. But really, I think the real thing for the Dolphins going forward is just going to be, was this season a fluke? I mean, they really started to collapse towards the end of the year. If it wasn't for a questionable horse collar and a game-winning field goal against the Jets, they could have missed out on the playoffs, and that spot would have gone to the Steelers. After, at the start of in the first half of the season, a lot of people were talking about them being Super Bowl contenders. So it's really just going to be talking about, again, was this season a fluke? Is Tua actually a legit good quarterback? Of course, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, there's no question about them being good receivers, but are they going to be able to keep it up on the offensive side of the ball? Is the defense going to be able to keep it up? Their defense played well, so definitely looking good there. But it's really just going to be, like I said, seeing if this season was a fluke, if they're going to be able to keep it up next year. I'm not sure what I would target in the draft if I was them. Actually, no, wait, they don't have a first-round pick. They don't have a first-round pick because they had to forfeit it because of the Tua situation. So. In the offseason in general, I'm not sure what I would target for them in terms of the, free agents or something like that. But, maybe get some offensive line help. Never hurt to have offensive line help because they seem pretty set at pretty well all the skill positions. Maybe get some more help in the front seven on the defense, just kind of standard things, and we'll see how they do next year. The 425 slot, the Minnesota Vikings did get beat by the Giants, and, this was kind of something that a lot of people outside of Minnesota really saw coming. I know, of course, there were still a lot of people that picked Minnesota to win. I picked the Giants to win because the Vikings, in my mind, were frauds all year long, and they kind of proved it in that game. This is the one game that I really didn't get to watch any of, unfortunately, but, they really just kind of proved that they were frauds. They had a negative point differential for being a 13-win team, and they couldn't even get it done at home against the Giants in the playoffs. Really, it's all about the defense for this team when you're talking about improvements. The offense Justin Jefferson's arguably the best receiver in the league right now. Dalvin Cook's still a solid running back. Kirk Cousins has been playing well these past couple of years. It's really just the defense can't seem to stop a nosebleed, which, is this is a team that, a few years ago had one of the best defenses in the league, and really just over the past couple of years, it's really diminished, and it's been what's been causing them all these losses. It's why they've had a lot of games this year where they've had to come back and get back in the game because the defense was just giving up so many points. Like, they gave up those 33 points to the Colts. They gave up like 40 to the Cowboys. They gave up almost 40 to the Bills. It's just like, you can't be doing that against these better teams. So, I mean, even against the Colts, they're a bad team, and they still gave up 33 points to the Colts. So, really just got to go looking, especially in the secondary, is, really where they need help. Theoretically, the front seven should be decent, but, Danielle Hunter can never stay healthy. And, they just need help everywhere on the defense, to be honest. Patrick Peterson can't carry the secondary on his own. He's an aging veteran, and he's not looked like his old self. Like, he's still kind of shown flashes of being like his old self, but, he's definitely not his old self at all. So, just need a defensive overhaul for the Vikings if they want to be able to do anything. And, it's just... I think they really benefited from being in a weak division. The Lions really didn't figure it out until the second half of the year. The Packers, of course, were pretty weak all year, and of course the Bears are the Bears. So I think they really benefited from that weak division. If they had been in like the NFC West or the NFC East, I think they potentially could have missed the playoffs. They probably would have still got in as a wild card, but they definitely wouldn't have had 13 wins if they had been in a different division. Than the NFC North. Of course, if they were in the NFC South, I'm sure they would have done the same thing. But if they had been in the West or the East, I think it'd be a very different story. So then moving on to the two teams that lost in the remaining two primetime games. First, the Sunday night game, the Baltimore Ravens losing to the Cincinnati Bengals. A much closer game than I think a lot of people, myself included, anticipated. Really, they were actually fingertips away from sending that game to overtime. The last, second Hail Mary, it got tipped, and one of the Ravens receivers, I'm not sure who it was fingertips away from pulling it in. So, really, really close, a much closer game. It really took a big turning point when Hubbard got that 98-yard scoop and score return. Not sure why Huntley was trying to jump over the pile when they were going from the 2. That's generally something you do when you're on like the half-yard line, and it's really dangerous. So I'm not sure what Huntley was thinking there. I know he thought some kind of penalty happened, but there was no penalty on that play. It was clean, and but it's definitely a little bit concerning for the Bengals that they weren't able to dominate this game. I mean, I know they did just play the Ravens the week before, so the Ravens definitely had time to learn stuff, but it does really make you think what would have happened if Lamar Jackson had been able to play. I know J.K. Dobbins, he especially came out and was quoted saying that they would have won if they had Lamar. So I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting for the Bengals going forward. But moving for the Ravens here, really all the questions in the offseason are about Lamar Jackson. He basically has been holding out, trying to get that big contract. And, I mean, if I'm the Ravens, it's one of those things that it's really like a risk reward because he really did not have that good of a season. He was on fire the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season and then really cooled off. And then, of course, he had this injury happen. So, if I'm the Ravens, I'd be really hesitant to give him a massive contract. Obviously you want to keep him around because he's a unique player, a unique athlete. He changes the whole dynamic of that offense. But, it's just one of those things at the same time, it's do I really want to give a record-breaking contract to a guy who I don't even know if, he still has it because, he like I said, he really didn't play super well this year. He didn't really play super well last year. He's kind of been on a steady sort of regression of sorts ever since his MVP season. And the fact that he turned down their first offer during the offseason, which was a pretty lucrative offer. I don't know. It's just interesting. It could work out really well. If he can recapture his MVP form, then the Ravens are going to look really smart if they give him a record-breaking contract. But at the same time, I'm just a little wary, especially given the fact that if I'm the Ravens, they don't have any receiving weapons. All they have is Mark Andrews, and, Bateman really hasn't turned out to be super great. He's also been hurt a lot. Their number one receiver for a good amount of the year was Devin Duvernay. So really just difficult for the Ravens going forward. They need to get some pass catchers for sure. Like wide receiver has to be their number one priority during the offseason. And also they need to start shoring up that secondary a little bit more because the secondary really underperformed this year. So that's the thing for the Ravens. And then finally, the Monday night team that lost, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tom Brady, of course, did not have a very good game. The Cowboys pretty easily won that one. I was a bit disappointed that was going to be the primetime game because I kind of thought the Cowboys were going to, I thought the Bucs maybe had a chance to win that game, but the Cowboys really blew them out. The Bucs, they were a team that didn't really deserve to be in the playoffs anyway. They were just there because they won the NFC South, and the NFC South is incredibly weak. And even then, they still only finished 8-9. They had a losing record. So, like I said, a team that didn't really deserve to be in the playoffs in the first place. Brady, there's obviously a lot of questions around him, whether he's going to come back next year. The Buccaneers did fire their offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich, so Todd Bowles is going to have a whole new staff next year on offense. And really, this is a team that, it's really contingent on what happens, because if Brady doesn't come back, I wouldn't be surprised. This is going to be hard for this team because they have a lot of these veteran players that they gave kind of 2- and 3-year contracts to, like Leonard Fournette and Chris Godwin and Shaq Barrett. They gave and Levante David. They gave them all, kind of shorter 2- to 3-year contracts, but they're all really expensive contracts. So it's one of those things that they're not really in a position to make any moves in the offseason per se, because they're really in a bad space cap-wise. And if Brady doesn't come back, then, they're basically going to be rolling with Blaine Gabbert and Kyle Trask at quarterback, which, if Brady can't take this team, to have a winning record, then what makes you think that Gabbert and Trask are going to do it? So they're in a really bad spot. Obviously, the Brady thing is all, that's kind of separate from the Buccaneers. Depending on what he does, he could retire. There's been rumors that he might go to San Francisco, rumors that he might go to Las Vegas. There's rumors are going to swirl until he makes an actual decision. I'm kind of leaning towards that he's not going to retire, but I also don't think he's going to come back to the Bucs. I know Zach thinks that he's going to go to the 49ers. I personally think he's going to go to the Raiders just because I think Josh McDaniels is going to find a way to bring him in, but who really knows what's going to happen with him? So the Buccaneers are not in a good spot going forward. The only thing that's helping them is the fact that they play in probably the weakest division in football right now. But that being said, finally done with the wildcard teams. Moving on to the 4 divisional round matchups here. So we have the 2 Saturday games, the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Kansas City Chiefs, and the New York Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. So I was 5 of 6 last week, like I said. The only one I got wrong was the Jaguars versus the Chargers, but thankfully that didn't affect my overall bracket too much because, since the Bengals won, it would have been Chargers Chiefs if the Chargers had won. So it's not like any of the matchups would have been different if the outcome was different. But we do have Jaguars Chiefs here, and the Jaguars, like I said, they had that really good comeback against the Chargers. They looked absolutely awful in the first half, managed to come back and win that game. The Chiefs, of course, they've looked like the Chiefs this year. Patrick Mahomes is on his way to winning a second MVP award. Travis Kelce, still the best tight end in football. They just look like the Kansas City Chiefs. It's really hard to elaborate more on that, but, they've won the AFC West. They claimed the number 1 seed in the AFC. Obviously, we don't know, given the whole Buffalo Bills-Bengals game situation, if they would have had the 1 seed, because, the Bills obviously could have taken it from them if they had beaten Cincinnati, but that game obviously got canceled, so we never got to see. It is going to be interesting, obviously, if KC and Buffalo meet in the AFC title game, because it's going to be played in Atlanta at a neutral site. But for this game here, I just think the Kansas City Chiefs are way too good for the Jaguars. The Jaguars, they really scraped by in that game against the Chargers anyway. I don't really have a lot of faith in them that they're going to, they can't do that and expect to get past Kansas City. The Chargers, they had obviously beaten the Chargers early in the year, and the Chargers had really had a hard time kind of closing out games. But if they come out and do something like that against the Chiefs, then, instead of it being 27-7 at halftime, it's going to be like 42-0 and when you're playing against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I just don't think they're ready for the big stage, and they're going to be at Arrowhead. It's going to be a really difficult atmosphere. Mahomes is hungrier than ever. I think the Chiefs take this one. I think it'll be closer than probably a lot of people think, but I think the Chiefs probably take this by around 2 touchdowns, in my opinion. Then the other 1 seed in action that hasn't seen, the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles. The Giants, of course, they got that win over the Vikings that I predicted. again, this is just a whole different animal here. The Vikings were a flawed team that really didn't deserve to be the 3 seed, and this Eagles team has looked like the best team in the NFC for most of the season. Jalen Hurts is fully healthy now. He's not even on the injury report anymore. He's still A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have been a great receiving duo for him. The Eagles' defense especially has been really big and really come up clutch. And the Giants, like I said, I still don't fully believe in them, but I didn't fully believe in the Vikings either. So I think that was kind of just like a matchup of teams I didn't believe in. So for this one, I'm also going to take the higher seed here, take the 1 seed, the home team, the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles, like I said, I think they should be fine. They beat the Giants both times this year. It's a team they're very familiar with, obviously. So, maybe the Giants will have figured something out, but I just don't trust Daniel Jones to carry this team further, especially against a much, much better defense in the Eagles. You're going against, a really terrible, like a bottom 5 defense. Now you're playing a top 10 defense. So, the offenses are both high powered, but it's just the difference in defenses here is really big. So I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles to win that one. So then we have on the Sunday games, the 3 o'clock Sunday game, the Cincinnati Bengals at the Buffalo Bills, what was supposed to be a Week 17 matchup that eventually got canceled because of the whole Damar Hamlin situation. But here they are meeting in the playoffs. This was definitely by far the hardest one of these matchups for me to pick because I could really see either team winning. Both teams had mistakes that they made in the wild card round. The Bills really should have blown out the Dolphins, and the Bengals really should have blown out the Ravens, but neither of those happened. They were both games that were a lot closer than a lot of people thought they would be. Josh Allen made some mistakes in that game against Miami. He did still throw for 300-plus yards, but, 2 bad interceptions in that game. Like I said, the Bengals struggled as well. They couldn't really get their offense going for a big portion of the game. The Ravens' defense was keeping Joe Burrow in check. But, like I said, it's a different game. It's a different atmosphere. The Bills, obviously, there's going to be a lot of emotion surrounding this game because of what happened last time. Damar Hamlin has been around the Bills facility, and he's been, doing well. So the Bills, of course, have that motivation to play off of. And, of course, the Bengals, they want to prove that, that they could have won. They were leading that game before it got canceled. So the Bengals definitely want to prove that last season wasn't a fluke as well, and they want to get back to the AFC Championship game and get back to the Super Bowl. And especially because, the Bengals have a really good record against the Chiefs. So I'm sure if the Chiefs beat Jacksonville, the Bengals are going to be really excited if they get the chance to play Mahomes again because Joe Burrow and the Bengals do really good against Kansas City. But I am going to have to go ahead and stick with the home team once again. The Buffalo Bills, they were my Super Bowl pick at the start of the year, and, they're my Super Bowl pick here for this. They're still my Super Bowl pick, so I got to stick with them. I think they're going to be able to clean up those mistakes. The Bengals don't have as good of a defense as the Dolphins. They always have a much better offense with Joe Burrow versus Skylar Thompson. But I think as long as Josh Allen can clean up those mistakes that he had in the game against Miami, I think the Bills will be able to take this one. The Bills, of course, they've been hungry for a long time. They were, a team that went to 4 straight Super Bowls and didn't win any of them. And, they've suffered some pretty bad losses in the playoffs the past couple of years. They definitely want the chance to play the Chiefs again, and especially since for them, like if they do get that, they're going to be able to play it at a neutral site. Obviously, if the Bengals win this game and they play the Chiefs, it's going to be at Arrowhead. But if the Bills win and the Chiefs win, it'll be at that neutral site in Atlanta. So the Bills definitely want another chance at the Chiefs after what happened last year. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Bills in this one. And then the Sunday 6:30 game, the Dallas Cowboys at the San Francisco 49ers. Ticket prices for this game are well above $1,000. So if you rich people want to go to this game, then you're definitely going to be spending some cash. This is obviously a rematch from the playoffs last year. The Niners took out the Cowboys in Wild Card Weekend last year. Definitely a really close game. The difference, of course, was that game was in Dallas. This time it's in San Francisco. And, the Niners, they really got off to a slow start in that game against Seattle, but come the second half, they looked like the San Francisco 49ers that are on an 11-game win streak right now. And, they looked like the best team in the NFC for the last part of the season. And in my opinion, I think they're still the best team in the NFC. I think, the Eagles started to fall off a little bit there, and the Niners, Like, they've got the best defense in the NFC, in my opinion. Brock Purdy's playing really well. Christian McCaffrey's still the best dual threat running back in the league. And, they just have too many weapons. Like, how are you going to contain them? And the Cowboys, like I said, it's going to be a whole different animal for them. Like I said, they played the Bucs, and they were a team that didn't deserve to be in the playoffs in the first place anyway. So this is definitely a whole different animal going to San Francisco, against the hottest team in the league right now. A much, much, much better defense, a much, much, much better offense. I do think it'll be close. The Cowboys, of course, and Niners, this is a historic playoff rivalry. They've met in several NFC championship games in the past, back in the Montana days and the Troy Aikman days and Steve Young days. So a very historic playoff rivalry here with the Cowboys and Niners. But I'm going to be boring again, and I'm once again going to go with the home team, the San Francisco 49ers. Unfortunately, I'm not picking any upsets this week. I did pick a couple last week, but I'm going to have to go with the chalk here. I mean, again, I think it's a little bit boring, but, really outside of the Bills and Bengals game, I feel pretty confident about all these picks. Even this Niners-Cowboys pick, I mean, the Cowboys, they're another team that have really yet to prove to me that they're not frauds. I kind of talked about that in the last video, so this is definitely going to be the prove it game. And also, I mean, who's their kicker missing 4 straight extra points? I mean, who does that? I'm not anywhere close to the level of an NFL kicker, and I feel like I could at least come close on one kick and 4 attempts. So, definitely some interesting things going on there. It's like, do you really trust the Cowboys kicker if this game comes down to a field goal or something? So I'm going to stick with the Niners, and it's going to be 1s and 2s in the conference championship game. So, like I said, a little boring picking chalk, but that's just what my gut is telling me. And my gut was 5 of 6 last week, so hopefully I go 4 for 4 and continue my streak. But thanks, guys, so much for watching. Make sure you leave down in the comments below who you think are going to win these games, who you think is going to advance to the conference championship. What do you think some of these other teams need to do that I talked about earlier in the offseason to get better? And I will be back next week covering the conference championship games and the winners of these games, and covering what the losers need to do in the offseason, just like this, just with less teams, because it'll be less teams to talk about. But until then, we'll see you guys next time.